In this segment of Relief Printmaking, we're going to look at pressure printing on the Vandy. Okay, here's some examples of pressure plates and their corresponding impressions. So this is the impression, and this is on a heavy paper. I believe this is a mulberry paper. And you can see there's quite a lot of texture in there. And there's letterpress printed on top. So here's the corresponding plate. So these figures of the Herero women of Namibia are created with a thin layer of cheesecloth. The background is an old painting I found in the studio, so it has that slightly raised surface of heavy acrylic. And we'll look again at the plate, or the print, and you can see how that pressure translates, pushes onto the ink and pushes all this detail forward. Pretty remarkable. So there's that one. This is another one from the same project. And the plate for it was created on the Cricut. So first there was a drawing of a blue jay, which was then translated into a vector image, just scanned and then vectorized in Illustrator, and then imported into the Cricut design software, where it was cut into vinyl. So the vinyl was removed or weeded out, leaving this really low relief surface. And it's mounted on a sheet of newsprint. So you can see the corresponding textures there. So you can do pressure printing with detail, but a machine like the Cricut is really helpful for that process. Here's one more that was done. Again, here's the image. This is a pressure print. And here's the corresponding plate. Super thin vinyl cut on the Cricut, but made from a drawing. So you can see it has a very organic line. And lastly, you can do really experimental things with pressure printing. This is a pressure printed sheet. And the plate is made out of cheesecloth that's just been taped down. So it really retains a lot of the three-dimensionality of that folded form. And the tape itself provides pressure. So it would be something like this. This is the cheesecloth mounted on paper. All right, that gives you an idea of what pressure prints look like. All right, here's my original sketch, which had these radial lines coming out of it. So now that I've proofed and finalized my print, now I'm starting to lay out the text. So I'm going to have some text at the top and at the bottom, and I'm going to put these radial lines in the background with a pressure print. So I've got these cut out of this drawn on this coverweight paper, and I'm just going to cut them out, I think by hand without a ruler, so they can have a little bit of an organic line. That's what I'm going to do next. All right, so this is the newsprint I'm going to use to create my pressure printing plate. This is the template for the size paper we're working on, and it has this dead zone marked out at the top. That's a space where the Vandercook can't make any impressions as it goes through the press. So it's always good to mark that out. I've got the center of the pressure plate marked out, and I'm going to use this flop as a guide. So I'm going to draw out the space where I want my pressure print to go. Right there, and there's my dead zone marking right across the top. Here's my center. Okay. Now, according to my sketch, I don't want to have the pressure plate running through the whole thing. I want to give myself some space down here for the text and space up at the top. So I'm going to measure that, and then I'm going to start gluing these down. Okay, so to get to this print, I used a couple of layers of pressure printing in the background for this yellow and the pink. Those are both pressure printed. I did cut a third plate that I didn't end up using, except that it gave me a guide, so it was useful. All right, so this is a proof from the linocut that I created, and it could have functioned as its own pressure plate. In fact, the raised area of ink actually produced more pressure, and we got some detail from that too. But it provided me the template for this plate, which I ended up using to create the glow of pink around the edges. So this is the negative space, and that corresponds here to this light pink area around the figure. And then this was the first pressure plate that I used, and it created the radial pattern of yellowy stripes that's around the edge. So whenever you're doing a printmaking project, you use some method of registration. This is called a flop. The flop is a way for us to anticipate where imagery is going to land on the page. And this flop is being used for all 3 layers of the print. So it's the size of my paper. It records basic information about where the shapes are going to land on the page, and it helps me line up every layer as I proceed through the process. So here's my flop. It is my roadmap to the print, and it's drawn on a sheet of acetate. That's the size of the paper I'm going to print with. It has some indication here of the part of the paper which can't be printed on the Vandercook. It's called the dead zone, and you can see it corresponds right here to this marking. So this is how it lines up. You make this T mark, so you mark the center, and you mark down 3 pica, and then you line up that T mark just like this, top of the plate with the horizontal mark, and the vertical mark matches the vertical mark on the press. So it slides in just like that. Perfect. And when you have it lined up like that, that's an indication of exactly where the paper is going to land on the block. Okay, to operate the Vandercook, this is the lever. Up is trip and print is down. Trip means you're going to be inking the plate or letter form, but not pulling a print. And print lowers the carriage down to actually put pressure and pull the print. So you operate it with this pedal, which when you step on the pedal, it moves these grippers up and down. So let's watch that magic happen. Ooh, okay. There's 5 grippers, and you can see this reminder right here that the type prints 3 pica below the top of the paper. So you always have to keep that in mind. You're never going to get any printing in that top 3 picas. Okay, so this is the registration guide. It has a couple of different settings already marked for you. you're using a pressure plate that is 14 by 21. So you want to set the registration guide back to that mark and lock it in. Okay, and now I'm still standing on the pedal. Da, da, da. And I'm going to slide the pressure plate in first. And then my printing paper is going to go over it, right in the center. And I have these marks on my plate, so I know where the edges of the paper need to go. Right there. Okay, and I take my foot off the pedal and I advance the carriage forward. Okay, so let me start with the pressure printing. So here's the image I ended up liking the best. So in the video that I post, I show you how I got to this point. But I started with a digital illustration and traced it onto the lino and carved my lino. And that was kind of how I started it. And then I designed the rest of the elements around that. Okay, so when I got it carved, I actually used that to make a pressure plate. Like I took one of the proofs and cut it out and mounted it. I didn't end up using this plate in the process, but this is what the plate looks like. It's 14 by 21, and there are pre-cut 14 by 21 sheets right by Haley's elbow under that table. But you can go to the newsprint drawer and cut yourself a 14 by 21 sheet. If you forget the size, it's written right here on the Vandercook. The main difference between Caligo Safe Wash inks and Letterpress inks is the way that they clean up. So even though they're both oil-based inks, Caligo Safe Wash Relief inks are formulated to clean up with simple green and water, while Letterpress inks can only be cleaned up with solvent. Letterpress inks can be found in large cans with lids inside of the Vandercook cabinet, and they come in colors that the Caligo inks don't have, including fluorescence and metallic colors. The solvent is located on the countertop in the studio in small red safety cans. They're plungers, so you push down on the top while the bottle is turned upside down to use it. So Caligo Safe Wash ink is highly pigmented, which means the amount of pigment is very high, which is great. That means you don't have to use very much to get a really intense color. And in fact, even when you add quite a bit of extender, the color doesn't really lose its intensity. It just becomes a little bit more translucent. So that's about 50% red, 50% extender. With the Caligo inks, there's one additional step, which is to add dryer. This is the dryer we use in the studio. It's called Galkid. It's also used with oil paints to accelerate the drying time. Caligo inks tend to dry very slowly, so adding a few drops of dryer can help accelerate the drying time. So you want to just mix the dryer into the ink. If you add too much dryer, it changes the viscosity of the ink, so you don't want to add too much, just a few drops. Do a tap out. Tap out helps you see what the color really looks like on the paper you're going to print on. And you want to dip your gloved finger into the ink and then spread it out. And that gives you a sense of what it's going to look like on the paper itself. Very important to do that because it looks different on the glass. So let's go ahead and roll out this slab of Caligo ink. We're going to take a little bit onto the brayer at a time, and then very evenly spread it across the glass. And this is a very good texture. You want to have a very lean slab on the glass, meaning the texture is very even. It has the texture of the skin of an orange. This is the piece, this is the reservoir of ink that you keep, where you keep a lot of ink, more than you need, and then you can come up with your brayer and grab a little bit of it and add it to your slab. But your slab needs to stay about this size. Don't let it get away from you. And you need to keep the ink nice and lean like that on the brayer and on the slab as well. If you made a color you like, you can save it. We're going to use wax paper. And scrape up the ink off the glass. Add it to the wax paper. Another good way to get more ink off the glass is to use a razor blade scraper. And then take your wax paper and fold it, trying to make a little pocket. And you want to seal it up with some tape. And then you can write your name in it, put it in an envelope, keep it in your flat file, or keep it in one of the areas near the presses. So to clean up this Caligo ink, I'm going to start with simple green and I'm going to spray the glass. I've already scraped most of it up and I'm just going to clean it down with some towels. Always make sure you look in here first for some used towels before you get a fresh one. And my tools, I can clean up in the same way. I can put some simple green on there and just pull the ink right off. Same thing with my razor blade scraper. And then for my brayer, grab a foam book and roll the excess ink off first. And then if simple green sometimes the ink is a bit stubborn, so you can use baby oil on the brayer. And that usually does a really nice job of cleaning it up. And then you can always follow that with simple green. And that gets the oil off. Okay, and then you are done. So letterpress ink is a little bit different in that it comes in a can. Sometimes the cans can be hard to take off. Most of the time they have a film on top that you have to push to the side, moving your spatula underneath the top of the crust to get to the fresh ink that's underneath. It's very, very stiff compared to Caligo ink. Let me get a little closer here. Yeah. It smells different and it's very viscous and sticky. And it's designed that way because it's running through a machine that's turning it and turning it, and as the cylinder moves, the ink gets warmer. But it has to be kind of sticky to create enough friction for those rollers to work properly. So this is the fluorescent pink. And again, I always recommend doing a tap out on the paper that you're printing on. So you can see what you have in terms of color. You do not need to add dryer to letterpress ink. It dries very quickly on its own once it has been printed on paper. It doesn't just dry in the air. It definitely has to be printed first. So if you're not putting the ink directly on a press and you're using a brayer, you roll it out the same way you would roll out the Caligo ink. But it's stickier, so you might need to use a little bit more force. But you do exactly the same thing. You roll out a slab, you have a reservoir of ink, you keep the ink very lean on the brayer and on the glass. And you recharge your slab by going up to grab more and rolling it back out. Try going different directions on the slab as well. And to clean this, again, you roll the brayer off on a foam book to start that process. This is also where you want to use your scraper. That does most of the work for you. And then once you've got most of that off, you really usually can get the glass clean with a bit of simple green. Don't necessarily need to use solvent on the glass. What you need to use solvent for is to clean the brayer and to clean any of the forms that you've used to make your letterpress print. So for example, that would be letters, wood or metal type, plates, anything like that. So I'm pulling off this ink from my spatula with just my hands. I don't necessarily need solvent on there either, unless it's real sticky or gooey. That's nice and clean now. My scraper, I have to use a little bit more force, but again, gets pretty clean. Baby oil can be really helpful to loosen things up if you have stubborn spots. And then I find that sometimes baby oil can help again once at the beginning of the process to loosen the ink, but I always have to follow up with solvent to really get the brayer clean. You'll notice it's much harder to get ink off of the brayer when you're using letterpress ink versus the Caligo Safe Wash. So I got a little bit off there, but I'm gonna go ahead and put some solvent on my rag. So I'm gonna plunge it a couple times, just get a little bit to start with, and you can see how easily it cuts through the ink on the brayer. Phone book paper on there. And a clean spot. So you want to try to clean the brayer until all the tone of the ink is off of there. And to make sure you look at the sides as well and the top. Okay, and we are good to go. We're going to put the lid back on the ink and put it back in the Vandercook. You really have to keep the ink lean like this. You know, I say that all the time, but it's true. Okay, now how do I know where to put the ink? Come over here. Closer. Can you see this block that's on the Vandercook? It's covered with acrylic plexiglass, just like we used for the monotype project. But this is a big block, and it's raised up to be type high, which is 0.918 inches. Now, this is how my flop fits on there. It's hard to see from where you are, but there's a little marking right here, which shows you where the dead zone is. Like, you can't print it right here, so you slide it right up. There's a pre-marked indication there where you can be. So you can take your Sharpie and make a little plan for yourself on this block. So my goal is to print in this area only, or to add ink in this area only. I'm trying to keep this bottom area clear for the text that's going to go on the bottom. That's my plan. That might be a little different from the plan that you end up doing, but it's always good to kind of think ahead. Okay, so here's my first layer. We're not actually going to be inking up the press itself in this process. So we don't need the rollers that are in the press. We're going to be using just the hand brayers for it. I just got that one out of the way because I didn't want to get it dirty and have to clean it. So I'm just coating the surface with my brayer. So this should be like really familiar based on what we did for the last project. Nice and lean, I like that. And so here's how it works. I'm going to take my pressure printing plate and move these two to the side. And it goes down first, okay? And then my, I'm going to do both. I'll do one on the normal text weight and one on the Caligo, so you can see the difference. Then you step on this pedal, which raises these 5 grippers up, and you slide the pressure printing plate in place. So there's a center marking here on the gripper. There's also a guide that you can move. There's a setting right here for 14 by 21 paper. So you want to move it, you can unlock it, slide it, and reset it right there. So my foot is holding these little grippers off. When I take my foot off, the grippers go down and they grip the paper. Okay, and now I'm going to put my printing paper on top of the plate, which sounds so strange, but that's how it works. There's already a marking on my plate telling me where to put the paper, which is super great. And then I'm going to roll it through.
Okay, that's the best thing ever.
Isn't that cool? It's very light and soft.
Yeah,
I think the way you want to put it. So when you come back, so our Vandercook doesn't do an automatic flip to trip mode again. It's been broken for a long time. So you have to just lever up and pull the carriage up. And that's why I'm going to work with you on the Vandercook. I know a couple of you have used it before, but I know it's like, what the heck is this weird old-timey thing? And it's scaring me. So that's why I like to work with you individually on it, at least the first time that you use it. It's not really that scary, and you're not even turning it on for this project, so it shouldn't be that bad. Okay, now we're going to do the Caligo, and just, well, we'll do that on the second layer. I'll spice it up the second layer. Run one more. So the Caligo is significantly lighter. And to get a good impression, you really need to put a sheet of the regular text weight behind it to add a little bit more pressure, okay? So now I've got that, and it's really only there for pressure, it's not going to be printed on. I'm going to line. We'll run this through. Much lighter. That was quite a bit lighter than the first one. And I think I will add a little bit more pressure to it. So the easiest way to do that is just to put another sheet of this text weight paper behind it. Take your foot off, and then you're going to push down and make a circle like that. Much better. Come a little further, and you can pull everything. Work with it.
How did you make that pink?
This is mixed with the fluorescent pink that is part of the Letterpress collection. That's how it's so bright. We have a fluorescent orange, blue, and pink. And then we have silver and gold as well. Five grippers, beautiful. This one, very nice. Put up and push down. Ooh, very pretty. Sometimes you just have to go. You hear that little click at the end? Then it releases. You know, something. Beautiful. Okay, I'm going to leave the circle a little bit more chunky and brairy. I just made that word up. Ooh. That's exciting. Push down. All the way down to the end.
Oh, I like that. Wait, so I need to grab everything?
Yeah, you can let this go. It rocks a little, but it's not going to go all the way back.